After months of waiting, today marks the release, or re-release, of Arashi Castles of Sin on PlayStation VR2. If you're not familiar, it's the closest VR's gotten thus far to the classic Tenchu series, so sit tight, because with this video, I'm going to attempt to get you caught up on both the original release on PSVR1 and all the updates and changes that have been made to this new version. Arashi Castles of Sin first released over 2 years ago on PSVR1, and since then, not too much has changed. So let's use that original 2021 review as a jumping off point. Arashi puts us in the role of Kenshiro, who's been tasked with traveling to 5 castles throughout feudal Japan that have been taken over by bandits. Each level is set up essentially the same. You'll be briefed by your cousin in the courtyard, then it's time to load up with supplies from the safe house. Once you're ready to go, you'll head out into the countryside and make the long journey to the tower itself. Levels here are fairly linear, but set up in a somewhat sandbox fashion, with plenty of options on how to get from point A to point B. Along the way there are collectibles to find, trees to talk to, and tons of enemies to take down. Finding the best way to kill everyone, or just sneak past them completely, introduces us to most of Arashi's core gameplay mechanics. You can blazingly run straight into battle, lay traps with landmines or poisonous food, or best of all, call on your trusty wolf companion Haru to help you out. Now, I'm going to say a lot of less than positive things about Arashi Castles of Sin over the next few minutes, but one look into Haru's big beautiful eyes will help soften the blow considerably. Okay, so far so good. Nothing's really changed to Arashi's core mission structure, or the way you take down levels. Haru, however, has not made the transition to PSVR2 very well. Somehow her fur is blurry? It's super distracting when you go to pet her, and you feel like your eyes are crossed. And sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg of everything that went wrong with this conversion. Being stealthy is probably your best bet here, not only because it's incredibly ninja-like to do so, but also because sword fighting kinda sucks. It's all based on parrying, so you need to block and then quickly attack, and you're constantly retreating because enemies have a tendency to get right up in your face, which makes the attacks almost impossible to block. There aren't any physics or ragdolls in play here, so everything comes off a bit wagglish, and swinging the sword too hard results in zero collision detection, so if you want your hits to land, you've got to swing much slower than you'd expect. The good news is that collision detection isn't nearly as janky as it once was. It's still not flawless, but most of your hits will land as expected now. And thanks to improved haptics, blocking and parrying feel better here too, with a satisfying jolt when metal meets metal. But that's it. We still don't have ragdoll physics. Sword fighting feels insanely basic with practically zero strategy. Block and attack, and block and attack for the entire game. And the AI is non-existent. This was barely acceptable last generation. In 2023, it's borderline pathetic. Because eventually levels start to drag on with areas that look and feel far too similar, and once you start experimenting with ways to make progress faster, you'll quickly realize that it's easy to cheese your way through a level. Not only can you hop from place to place and remain out of sight, but even if you have 5 enemies chasing you, there's nothing to stop you from racing to the end of the level and triggering the loading screen. Sure, you don't have to cheat like this, but you will give in to this at some point or another, whether out of necessity or just sheer boredom, and it's not satisfying. Oh right, so this is actually something that's been fixed for a while, even back on the PSVR1 version. You can't conclude a level anymore with enemies nearby, so at least it's harder to cheat now. We do need to stop though and address something I didn't really think was going to be a problem in this new version of Arashi, and that's the controls. Now in PSVR1 things weren't exactly great. Climbing wasn't immersive, there was no support for left-handed players, items and weapons had no weight, and swapping weapons felt clumsy. And all of that somehow came along for the ride here in the PSVR2 version. This edition is called the Final Cut. It's a $30 game with no upgrade path if you already own it, and it was co-developed this time around by industry legend Skydance Interactive. Everything about this release screams massive upgrade, but playing it reveals that there's been no upgrade at all. In fact, certain things have been downgraded substantially. First, there are very few options to customize your experience, and cranking the smooth turning up to maximum speed is still way too slow. Second, the jump is now mapped to the top half of the right analog stick, so if you're like me and you're not too careful about pushing the stick dead left or dead right, then you're going to be hopping around accidentally, kind of frequently. And that's not something you want in a stealth game. But the biggest offender might be the broken walking controls. Pushing forward on the left analog stick should move you forward, but that's not always the case in Arashi Final Cut. Sometimes it'll move you diagonally, or off to the side. Now, this doesn't bode well in battle, and especially in boss fights. And the only way to fix it is to stop and recalibrate every 2 to 3 minutes. The art style in some of the areas is simply beautiful, despite the somewhat low resolution. Jumping around the levels from rooftop to rooftop feels great, there are ropes to climb, grappling hooks, and if you play the game as intended, there are a lot of fun ways to take down enemies, or sneak past them completely. There are just too many little things that add up, keeping Arashi from greatness. So while Arashi only gets a slightly above average score from me, I'll still remember the adventure fondly. Yes, and you too, Haru. I guess the one good thing I can say about the Final Cut is that the resolution has been improved significantly. It would have been nice to have gotten some dynamic foveated rendering, which might have helped remove some of the shimmering in the distance, but I guess 120 reprojected is the best we can expect from this low-effort port. And unfortunately, because absolutely no care was taken when converting this only above-average game to begin with, what we're left with is something that's barely worth talking about. It's frustrating to play, it feels even more outdated than it did 2 years ago, and I have to question why this version even exists at all.